Hi, I'm Steve Moriarty from Moriarty's Gem Art. We're a jeweler on the square in Crown Point, and we're also available online at MoreGems.com and TanzaniteJewelryDesigns.com. So today what we're going to talk about is this beast. This I've been putting off cutting for about 6 months now, and it's time to get to it. You know, the reasons that have held me back on this is because of the difficulties of the inclusions that are in it to deal with, and also a little bit of fear because I've seen a piece like this before, and actually it fractured on me while I was cutting, and it was going to cut a 100-carat stone. This one will probably cut a 30, and a second stone on this side that's probably going to be somewhere around 10 carat. So over the next week or so, we're going to run through the process of cutting this and show you cutters, the difficulties that I have to deal with, and hopefully we'll end up with a couple of beautiful stones when we're done. So this is a natural color Tanzanite. This is how it was mined. It has very pure colors, no green to it, not an extremely dark color, but really a nice crystal. And I'm going to show you what the dichroic colors or trichroic colors in a natural Tanzanite look like. So let me see if I can get this right. How's that look? So this should be the purple and yellow. And that may be the blue and yellow. And this direction is maybe the blue and the purple. I can't see it, so I'm just doing it from memory. But so the yellow color that you see in there, what's going to happen is once I've cut this stone and get all the inclusions out, because inclusions tend to break once you start heating these, because we're going to heat this to 1,000 degrees, and that yellow is going to disappear and just leave the blue and purple, and that's what we expect from Tanzanite. That yellow is kind of making this look like diesel. They call this diesel. It's kind of a brownish, reddish color. And once it's heated, that's going to disappear, and we should have a couple of beautiful Tanzanites. All right, so this is our crystal. Very, very clear crystal, so I don't really have to use immersion fluids. If I had an issue that the surface was rough and I couldn't see into it easily, you can use wintergreen oil. This is available online. It's just pure wintergreen oil. It's got a refractive index, maybe 152. So on most gems, it's very helpful. You can either just wipe it on the surface or you can immerse it and look into the gem. So you can use a light or you can use your flashlight. Now I've looked at this in the scope and used a visor, and I've tried to plot out a map showing where all my inclusions are so I can try and figure out what to cut from this. We've got issues of the way this crystal is shaped on the back. You know, the angle that it's at, we have to consider. So let's take a look at the map I've made of this stone. I've plotted out all the inclusions and the different sizes. So first of all, there's a lot of inclusions up here at the top. So I've X'd them out. That's unusable material. I'll show you that. So those inclusions are up in here. They're in both tips of both these crystals. So we're just going to cut that away. And the next inclusion that's a problem runs right across here. So it's 5.5 millimeters from the edge, and I've got about 20 millimeters height, and we've got about 30 millimeters across this way. So my usable depth on this is 12 millimeters. The actual depth at this point is 14.7 millimeters. So let me show you that. So this is the inclusion that I've got to deal with. You know, I've estimated its depth. These often run deeper than you expect. So you assume if you think it's 2 millimeters deep, it's 2.5, 3 millimeters. You'll find that through all your cutting that everything is deeper than what you think. But I've tried to estimate it well. And the other issue, because it's a twin crystal, there's usually a plane that runs through here, and in some pieces you can see absolutely that there's a visual plane. In this piece you can't see it, but I'm going to assume it is, and that we're not going to cut across that plane, and I'll show you that in another picture. So this is between the two crystals, and you can see this plane that runs here. I'm not sure I think this is the plane we're going to deal with, and we're going to saw it right across that, right through here, and we're going to cut a stone here and cut a stone here. So this is the plane we're going to saw through next. This is the inclusion I have to deal with. I have determined that this inclusion side is going to be my pavilion, and I look at this point being where the culet will be. So I do some kind of brilliant cut. The cut is naturally going to go above this inclusion if I predicted the depth correctly. So now we're going to saw the crystal across that line that separates the twin crystals, and then we'll determine what we're going to cut from it. So I've got this little point here that's kind of in the way of getting a straight cut down the crystal. So I'm going to try and cut into that slightly, make room that I can line the saw up. Okay, hit it. All right, so I got rid of that little crystal tip. Now I should be able to hit this line again. You can maybe see the line that I'm going to cut down. Cutting it split right along that line, so there was a weak point there, but it split perfectly for me, so I didn't even have to saw it all. So that means that during cutting it probably would have split there if I tried to cut it across that crystal. So you can see I cut maybe a third of the way down, and then it just split along that line, and it's exactly the line that showed that came out the bottom of this stone. So there is another line over here, so I hope it's not an issue with that, but we'll find out when we start cutting this bigger piece. So we've got our two pieces now. We'll dop them up, and I'll cut away the bad parts of it, see what I've got left, and determine just what cut I'm going to do with these two pieces. So before I dop this up, I'm going to take out the problems that are in the tip and work on the shape a little bit, so just it makes it easier to figure out what the center of the stone is when you're dopping. So this lap, I believe, is probably about a 400. I'm not using very coarse right now. And I'm just going across the dop to try and more evenly use, across the lap, more evenly use the diamond that's in it. And that's got most everything out of this crystal. Now I'll more easily find the center when I'm dopping it. And then the same with this one. The inclusions go a little further in this piece. All right, here's our finished preforms. They're both looking kind of square cushiony to me. So this started out as 112 carat. Currently we're about 101 carats. This is a 66 carat piece. Now this piece measures 18 by 18 by 14. Now if you want to figure out the percentage depth, that is, you take the depth and divide it by the width, and that gives us 77% on the stone. And 77% is a deep enough material that you can cut it properly. The other piece, this weighs 35 carat. It measures 15 by 15 by 11. And if we divide 11 by 15, we get 73%. So this can be somewhere between 73 and 80% depth. So like I say, it's looking like some kind of cushion. I do have this issue here that I'm going to have to match all the way around it. But looking at this, I'm estimating maybe 40% out of these pieces of rough, possibly 45, but probably 40%. So we're going to get somewhere between 12 and 15 carat out of this piece, and maybe 25 to 30 carat out of this piece. So next we're going to dop this up and get ready for cutting. So I'm going to first dop this larger piece of Tanzanite, the 66 carat piece, and I want to cut the pavilion first. So I'm going to dop the opposite side of the side with the big crack in it. And first of all, I use some dental wax that's available from any drugstore. Nice and sticky, and will form to the stone and hold it in place once you get it centered to where you want it. And I'm using a dop that's about the size of the stone I have to use as a centering device. Make sure there's no flats on it, because often we'll be cutting and we'll cut into the dop. So pick one that's nice and round, and it's a very helpful device in centering your stone. So now that I think I have it centered, just press it into the wax, and now I'm going to find the right dop that's appropriate size to glue the stone up. And then I'm also going to follow through and check my measurement with a millimeter gauge, just to make sure I'm accurate. So I'm ready to mix some glue and dop this up. It's often best if you dop under the dop, but it's also harder to get off. And my greatest fear is that this piece of material is like one that broke on me when I was trying to heat this dop loose. So I started just putting glue around the edge, and then I can peel it off and easily remove it. And that's what I'm going to do with this stone, just because this stone reminds me so much of that one that blew up on me, that I'm going to try and not put too much heat to this, even though I have to heat it to 1,000 degrees later. I'm going to just dop around the edge. Like I say, in most stones, if they will take the heat, and you know they're not real heat sensitive, you should dop beneath the dop. It will hold better. You won't have the problem of falling off. But this time I'm just going to put it around the edge. Now, I've previously cleaned the stone and the dop with alcohol and made sure all the old epoxy was off it. So we're just going to mix equal parts of this epoxy. It's a big stone, so we need to have plenty of glue. Okay, that should be good. So what I'm going to do is put the glue up further on dop and let it just drip down onto it, and then it won't get under the stone. I say the risk of this is that it breaks free because you don't have that extra support beneath, between the dop directly and the stone. But I'll be able to just pick this off and have less risk of causing damage from heating up the dop too much and actually causing a problem with the stone. Like I say, it seldom happens, but it happened on a Tanzanite just like this. So just manipulate it so you don't get the glue over the edge of the stone. You don't want to be cutting into glue. It's tough on the lap, and it takes a long time to cut through glue. So this will need to set ideally overnight, but at least 3 or 4 hours before you go cutting. So it's been about 7 hours, and we should be good and hard, and hopefully it'll stay on the dop for me. So let's take it out of the transfer block. Making sure everything's good and tight. Visually square it up. And now I'm going to try and get it square. If you look at it closely, you can see I've got a pretty big corner here that I have to deal with. So one way or another, it's going to have to be matched up on all 4 sides. So first I'm going to cut it 90 degrees and get the 4 sides square. And I'm cutting with a lap that's about a 400 grit. Kind of check, see how square I am. And it's pretty well centered. So I got the dop in the center of the piece pretty well. So now we're fairly well squared up. I still have this issue, and it's the girdle's not all the way over here, but we're not going to cut a square. We're cutting a cushion shape, so there'll be some angles that'll take this material and get me a even girdle all the way around, hopefully. So I've run into a bit of an issue here, and on this corner here you can see where that line is, and it appears to run a little deeper than I expected. So what I'm going to do first is, seeing as I know I'm going to have to get rid of this amount of material at least on this side, and I can cut that, and I know I'm not going to be losing anything, I'm going to cut there and see what's left of that inclusion when I'm done. And it is possible I may have to change the cut style I'm doing. I could see it could be a shield if this is a problem that it runs too deep. So I'm going to cut a little bit on this facet that is got me out of square a little bit, but I'm going to cut the matching facet to the other side and see what that inclusion looks like. So this is the part of the stone that's like a facet on the girdle that's got me out of square. That is material I had to deal with, but I can cut on this side and take the equivalent amount of material and see what's left of that inclusion before I proceed. So it does go a little deeper than I thought. I'm not sure if it's above my girdle that I may miss it, but it's looking like it could be a problem. So I'm going to try and analyze this a little more, and I'll get back with you with what I decide to do. So this is something that sometimes happens, inclusions that you know are there, but you don't know exactly how deep they run. And looking at this, it runs deeper than I thought, so making this a square cushion is probably not going to be possible. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut a little more through this inclusion, try and get most of it out. And then, because I won't be square on the dop now, I'm going to have to remove this stone and redop it to the center. So it's going to create a few more problems, because that inclusion I'm trying to miss that's up here is going to get closer to the culet, to the center. So it's going to create a little more problem. So this is why I put this stone off for so long, because I knew it was going to be trouble. But I think we'll get through it, and it's just going to create a little more work. So I continue to run into issues with this stone. I've gotten most of the one problem inclusion out, and I'm now down to 56 carats. And you know, this is where this wintergreen oil comes in handy, because this roughened surface from the cutting lap, now when we put the oil on it, you can easily see into the stone through that rough surface. So the problem I was cutting out is right here, but can you see it? But if we look further, there's a plane that runs across this direction. And I'm not going to be able to get that completely out. It almost looks like a cleavage plane. Hopefully it doesn't part there. But it is vertical. It'll be vertical to my table. It'll be out at the girdle of the stone, so it's probably not going to show up. as long as it stays in one piece. And I'll get most of it out, but there'll be still a little bit of that left. Also spotted a little crystal in here that I hope cuts out because they don't heat well. So this is a disaster waiting to happen, but we'll hope we'll get through it. I'm going to redop this up. We're now going to be cutting a cushion that's not square, but still hopefully will be a beautiful stone. Okay, so I'm redopped once again, and I'm going to work at putting a shape in that's going to hopefully remove most of the inclusion that's left. I have a little piece here that once I put 3 facets down the sides, or 5, whichever I decide, it's going to remove that, and so I'm going to work at forming a nice girdle and hopefully getting rid of most of the inclusions. There'll probably be a little bit left of the cleavage plane, but like I say, it's going to be right out at the girdle of the stone, and it's probably not going to show up. So I've finished cutting this Tanzanite using the New Bond 325, which is pretty much comparable to like a 3000 metal disc. So I'm going to polish directly from that, and to do that I'm going to use a bat lap. And the bat lap is a tin alloy lap that is harder than my tin lap and produces a nice flat facet. Charge the bat lap, we use WD-40 to clean it off. And then we get our diamond powder. Get your finger a little greasy, so you pick up some diamond. This is 50,000 diamond. we spread it across the lap evenly. And now you're ready to start polishing. I generally run middle speeds on this, anywhere from slow to fairly high speed. So I'm going to start with I've got 3 rows of step facets at 60 degrees, 51 degrees, and 41 degrees. And I'm going to start at the 60 degree because I've got a little bit of inclusion I want to get out. So I'm going to polish until I remove it. Now, up to now, while cutting, I use a visor. Visor is much quicker to use than using a loop, but once you start polishing, you're going to need to move to the loop so you can see much closer. So I'm making minor adjustments, trying to get back to where I'm polishing the entire facet. And this has got just a teeny bit of my imperfection left. So I'm going to polish a little bit deeper. You don't want to have to polish too far because you're going to have to do that to all the other facets. And if you have to go too far, you may as well go around and recut rather than trying to polish something out. This particular inclusion is very small and it does break the surface, so it shouldn't cause any issues with heating. But better gone than there. So that's pretty much got a nice polish on that facet. Here's a polished facet. What I'm talking about, the difference between light and dark, is when that transition between a bright reflection to a dark reflection is where you're going to see the facet the best. And you can see this facet is hopefully pretty well polished. It's not wiped off very well, but it does have good polish on it. It's smooth, no dots, and it's ready to go on to the next facet. I've finished cutting the pavilion now. I've got 3 rows of step facets that are at 41, 51, and 60 degrees. And now we're going to take it from the machine and we're going to transfer it into a V-Dop. And we'll start cutting the crown after the glue dries. So it's time to remove our dop from the crown side of the Tanzanite. And this is where I've had problems before, but I didn't put glue underneath the dop, but because of the way it formed to the top of the stone, there will be some glue underneath it, so I will have to heat the dop. So this shouldn't be an issue, but as I've said before, it's been an issue before with a stone that looked much like this. So I've got most of the glue picked off of this. You do have to be careful when you're doing this. You know, I want to get as much off as I can, but when you're popping it out, you can pop little chips off your stone. So just be cautious. And then once most of it's off, I try and go around the edge of the dop quickly and just get us through as much of that as possible. Sometimes it'll pop off, but I think in this area I've got glue underneath it, so we're going to have to heat the dop. And just put the dop over the flame, hold the stone tightly, putting pressure on the stone. Whoop! And sometimes it pops off that easily, but try and hold on to the stone. So we're freed and ready to cut the crown of the stone. Now that we've freed up the crown side of the stone, as I tell my cutters, the first thing you have to go after is the problems, and this stone has a problem. The angle here is going to determine what the angle that we're going to cut the girdle at. And to do that, I usually put it down on the lap, try and get a light in an appropriate position, find out where that's at, and try and visually see what's flat. Not too easy to do. And after that, we'll cut a little bit and see just where we're at. This is set at 46 degrees, which is pretty low for the culet angle, but it's what we have to work with. Still cutting through the glue that was there. So I'm going to set it up a little bit higher. I like to get as much height to this first facet as possible. Because the lower we cut away a lot of the material that's on the rest of the stone. This is the low point that we have to deal with. The rest of the stone, there's plenty of material, and we'd like to keep as much of that as possible by getting this angle up as high as possible. looks like 55 degrees is about where we're going to be, which is good. That's a good starting point. So we'll probably do something like 55, 40, 30, or 35 for the 3 facets. I'm going to do a step cut crown. So that's formed our girdle, and we are at 55 degrees. So I'll finish the step facets around at that 55 degrees and then go on to the next raw facets. When you start cutting the girdle, you want to take a close look at the facet and try and determine whether it's completely square. So as you go around and cut the entire girdle, if this isn't completely rectangular and parallel sides, what's going to happen is when you get back around to this facet, the girdles are not going to match. So try and make it as square as possible, and if it doesn't match up, you go ahead and feather back around and try and get everything to match up correctly. So this is an issue you're going to run into often, and that's once you get around faceting, you get around to where you started and they don't quite match. So your options are recut all the facets. In this case, I don't have a lot of girdle left to do that, or you can feather them in, and that means going from this facet to the next facet and just making them closer but not perfect. So this next facet I would cut almost meets at the girdle, and then go on to the next one and just feather it in to get them as close as possible. So normally this should be at 0. We normally start the lowest facet and set the gauge to 0, but because we started at the problem and it was on the end, which is actually the highest point, and I use 0 there, once I get around to the thinner edge of the stone, my gauge is going to be under 0. So it's not a problem because we're well above critical angle. And when you go to polish, just remember where you started, and if remember that in this case I was on the end and I set to 0. So if you start polishing on the end and set it to 0, everything's going to work out okay. I've finished the stone. Not quite as big as I'd hoped for, but inclusions were definitely a problem. I'd hoped for 30 carat, but maybe we're in the 20 carat range. It's a fairly deep step cut. So I'm hoping tomorrow to take it out of the jar and we hit at least 20 carat and I can still make some money. So take it out of the machine and put it in the jar of attack, and by tomorrow should be free. We'll weigh it up and get ready for heating, and then we'll move on to the next half of the stone. And this stone I've decided to cut it down the blue axis. It's going to be a deep stone. Some people may not like it because of the depth, but it needs a lot of help color wise. This half of the crystal didn't have a lot of color, So I'm going to cut it right on the blue and, you know, hope to get a 10 karat stone. It will be a little overly deep, but we can design a pendant for it. Christopher Michael designed something and build it in such a way you can't see the depth, but that extra depth is going to add to the color of the stone. And because we cut it in a stepped emerald cut, it should also add to the depth of color. Well, it's time to put our stones in the oven, and tomorrow we'll find out whether it's a bad day or a good day. Because here's our stones. We have a 16 karat and a 21 karat. Now the 21 karat has a little, very teeny crystalline inclusion down near the culet of the stone. And crystalline inclusions can be issues. They can cause fracturing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to heat very slowly. I'm going to take 24 hours to go up to 1050 degrees, and hopefully the slow rate will prevent the expansion of that crystal to create a fracture in the stone. So I'm going to put them in my vessel and cover them with investment. This is to slow the process of heating. Covered up. And into the oven it goes. So this is going to take about 24 hours to finish this process. Usually I do it in about 10 hours, but hopefully we'll be successful and won't have an issue tomorrow. So the oven's set and started, and it looks like 24 hours and 15 minutes before I can open that oven back up. So we've removed our stones from the oven. They've been in for 24 hours, about twice what I normally do, but it's all because of my fear of this stone cracking. It has a few issues inside of one of them, and as I've noted all the way along this video, I've been a little nervous about this particular piece. So we heated it slow over 24 hours, and it cooled over the last 12 hours, and so now it's time to see what we've got. The risks here are the one stone that's included that I'm worried about weighs 21 carats, even at $400 a carat. We're looking at an $8,000 stone, so that's the risk at the moment. All right, let's see what we've got. So this is the 16 karat emerald cut. And lighter color as I expected. Doesn't look like any issues. Kind of a light salon color. Attractive stone. Oh, looks clean. Success. And a really pretty purple color. Not the most intense color, but beautiful stone, good brilliance. And what a relief, no cracks. So we got a 21 karat, that's a little more purple, a little deeper color, and a 16 karat emerald cut. So 37 carats total weight out of our 112 karat Tanzanite rough, and no cracks, and just very attractive stones. So I would put these at maybe this one 400, 450 a carat, maybe this one somewhere in the 300 a carat price.